It's seed starting time for us, the Griffin family farm. And depending on when you're watching this video, you're either wrist deep in potting soil or preparing to be. So in this video, I'm gonna walk through the way that we have come to learn how seed starting really works, how to maximize germination rates, how to save costs, and of course, how to grow healthy plants right from the beginning. So welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Taylor and I teach gardeners sustainable and regenerative growing techniques that eliminate waste and boost yields. And one of the things that I feel most proud of is our seed starting ability. My wife, Cassidy, is chief of staff when it comes to this part of our growing operation. So a lot of the demonstration that you'll see will be her hands, not mine. Just a heads up. And a lot of seed starting videos are going to focus on how to grow specific plant varieties and maybe focus less on the nitty-gritty details about the components of seed starting. That actually is exactly what we're going to get into. The bit of the nitty-gritty of the science, how to optimize your setup, how to determine what is most worth your time and money, and ultimately how to do this from scratch for yourself, because it's probably a lot more doable than you think. So in case this is a brand new concept to you, what is seed starting and why do we not just grow 100% of plants outdoors once it's warm enough to direct sow? There are a lot of plants that it does make sense to direct sow, and it would be pretty inconvenient to start indoors first, only to transplant them outside, such as most root veggies, grains, and cover crops. But if you have the opportunity to start seeds indoors before getting them outside, it's likely an opportunity that you want to take. To state the obvious, seeds take time to germinate and grow into mature plants. Some do better in cold temperatures, and some won't even try to grow below 50 degrees. But for the most part, any seed that's sown indoors first is going to grow a bit faster, be bigger, and more ready to go in the ground, closer to providing you with a harvest. Some plants that you might be able to grow in your area aren't even going to be worth it trying to get started by direct sowing, because you may never see a harvest, or you get a very small one by the time your first frost comes around at the end of the growing season. Depending on your zone, you have a limited window of time when plants can actually sink their roots into the soil. And if we can move up the first inch or two of that growth on the calendar by starting seeds indoors, you're basically just getting a really good head start. I've identified 9 different components of seed starting from beginning to end. Some of these you may be familiar with, and others you might want a few tips on. So I'll briefly describe the components here, and we'll have everything time-stamped so that you can search for the information that you need. These do kind of build on each other, so hopefully you'll find it worth your time to watch all the way through. The first component of seed starting is timing. You need to know when to start which seeds indoors so that you can get them outside at the right stage of growth. The next component is growing medium. Choosing the right growing medium is key for making this whole thing worth your time and effort. I'll be walking you through 3 examples for options that you have, 2 of which I can recommend, and 1 I will suggest that you avoid. And I'll teach you what to sort of look for if you want to go with a different option. And once you have your growing medium selected, you need somewhere to put your plant starts. So we'll talk through the next component, which is containers for your seedlings. An optional component at this stage, but one that we definitely recommend trying out, is seed soaking. And this is where you give your seeds the opportunity to germinate preloaded with beneficial compounds and biology that's going to help them grow strong and healthy. Once seeds are started, there are 4 components that we need to keep an eye on, keep managed, and those are moisture, light, airflow, and temperatures. And finally, once we get to the point where a seedling is almost ready to go in the ground, we need to take care to set them up well for the new environment by hardening them off before eventually transplanting them. That is our roadmap for the rest of the video. And if you're like me, you might be asking the totally reasonable question of, is this worth it? Because that is a pretty long list of components to manage. And yes, I totally get that. The good news is that once you've got your system kind of down, it's way simpler than it might sound. And once you start starting your own seeds, you sort of unlock a world of potential growing. I'm going to try to touch on what this might look like at a couple different scales, because I know that there's a range for y'all. We're currently preparing to grow on about 1/3 of an acre, with 1/10 of an acre in actual production, or 1/10 of an acre that's soil with plants actually in the ground. So this is a very small scale micro farm operation that we've got here. Some of the stuff that I talk through might make more or less sense depending on how many flowers and veggies you're trying to grow. The 3 main reasons that seed starting is such an incredible skill to have is, number 1, depending on how much you're trying to grow, you can save a ton of money. 2, you can most likely grow much healthier plants that are more likely to make it to maturity. And 3, you have almost complete control over what variety you get to grow and harvest from. And before we get into the main method that I'm going to outline, I want to highlight what I consider to be the most affordable and hands-off approach to seed starting possible that works for the majority of plants, which is winter sowing. We just released an entire video detailing this process, but essentially winter sowing is where you create a small greenhouse, fill it with soil, plant your seeds, water it, leave the greenhouse outside all winter until your plants are ready to transplant. You can do this still if you're watching this video right when we're releasing it. Otherwise, you can wait to try it until next year, but winter sowing is a super hands-off option. It gets you potentially the healthiest possible plants, the least amount of time and money. Highly recommend trying out winter sowing at least a few seeds this season if you're growing in zone 8A or below. But if you're looking to get started sowing seeds indoors this season, or maybe you're just looking to upgrade your game, let's start looking at the components that we outlined before, starting with timing. Timing is first and arguably the most important step in seed starting. If you start your seeds too early, your plants are going to outgrow their containers before it's warm enough to be placed outside, leading to ailments such as root boundedness and legginess. Ideally, we want a seamless transition between the seedling's indoor growing container and the soil outside. You could think of this as like a kid kind of needing a new pair of shoes because they outgrew their old ones. It gets pretty awkward trying to walk around with your feet crammed into a pair of shoes that's too small. On the flip side, you don't want to upgrade shoe sizes too quickly or they won't stay on your feet. Thing is, each seed is going to have a unique timing when it comes to upgrading their shoe size. Some seeds, just like kids, are slower growing at first. Some seeds germinate immediately and start popping out of their container within a few weeks. The annoying advice that I can give you on this topic is to check the back of your seed packet for information on how long you need to give your seeds to grow before getting them in the ground. It should tell you a few pieces of information. Some seed packets will tell you when to start your seeds based on your zone. Others might tell you how long before your last frost. That said, there's always going to be some degree of guessing and iteration as you read your own weather patterns and temperatures. If you start your seeds too late in the season, the main and really only thing that you lose is time, which is what a lot of we're getting out of seed starting in the first place. You miss out on the running start that you'd get otherwise. But what happens if you start seeds way too early? I already mentioned plants can get root bound. This is where the roots hit the bottom of the container that they're growing in, and then they start traveling to the side or looking around for more soil to burrow into. And because the potting mix is ideally very fine textured, they'll be able to travel with ease, wrapping themselves around the inside of the container, tangling with other roots, and making the transition to outside a bit more challenging. Plant size is largely dictated by root system size, and all plants are a little different here. Lettuce, for example, has a pretty shallow root system that sort of mirrors the above ground plant. Plants like celery have a very strong lateral root network that grows out to the sides. Tomatoes, on the other hand, are a pretty deep rooted system, but no plant wants roots that are bound up and tangled. Now, you might think that you can just upgrade the size of your container if your plant gets too big too fast, and that might work to avoid the plant getting root bound and extending the amount of time that you need before popping it in the ground. There remains the problem, however, of light. Indoor lighting setups, which we'll take a look at in a bit, are super helpful for supplying an abundance of light for small seedlings, but not nearly enough of an intense amount of light to supply a lot of veggies needs and flowers. You can mitigate this by using a really high-powered grow light and keeping them on 16 hours a day for your plants, but generally speaking, plants that are started too early result in thin, spindly plants that are shooting upward in desperate search for sunlight to make up the deficit, and then putting those plants in the ground becomes a bit of a risk. They won't hold up to the wind as well. They might blow over or snap. They bruise more easily, and the overall transplant shock leads to weakened immunity and disease susceptibility. Now, that said, there are ways that you can solve those problems depending on the plant that you're growing, but for the purposes of seed starting, it's best to pay attention to how fast your plants are growing and time germination in accordance with the seed packet's instructions. If anything, it's better to wait a little bit too late and lose a little bit of time so that you get a healthier plant in the end. Now, something that has really helped me and Cassidy for starting our seeds is the planning program that we use, Seed Time. There are a lot of apps like this out there, but we use Seed Time and we really appreciate it. There's a lot that you can do within the app. It tells you all the dates that you need to know, when to start your seeds, when you need to transplant them based on the plant, the variety, the zone you're growing in, and especially if you're managing hundreds or even thousands of plant starts, it's kind of a no-brainer. I know people did it before without apps like this, but I don't feel like it would be possible for us to stay quite so organized. Check out Seed Time if you're trying to grow a lot this season. If you've got a few raised beds and some pots, probably not as worth it as much. So once you've nailed down the timing for each of the plants that you're going to be starting seeds for, you can move on to your growing medium. And this is one of the most crucially important parts of seed starting. It all matters, or else we wouldn't talk about it, but potting or seed starting soil is a big topic. And the reason for that is something that I actually heard maybe into my second ever growing season. I heard someone say, you really miss out on a lot when you only think about the health of the plant once it's in the ground, or when you only take care of your soil outside. We really want to be thinking about the health of the plant from germination all the way through to harvest. So if you're going to go through the effort of seed starting, investing in whatever equipment or whatever, or at the very least, the time that it takes to do this, you really want to get this part right. It's so worth it in my opinion. Like I said before, there are 3 options that I'll be showcasing in this video. The first one is your standard bag of Miracle-Gro potting mix. This is the most common, most used potting mix in the world, or at least in the US, to my knowledge. Scott's Miracle-Gro, for better or more likely for worse, is the household name associated with home gardening. And so their potting mix is going to be on every store shelf coming up here, maybe already is. We'll talk about what's in this in a moment. The second potting mix that I'll show you is on the opposite end of the spectrum, in my opinion, as far as what you can buy from the store. This is the Espoma brand. I have absolutely no affiliation with these guys. I just have a bag of this mix because I'm going to be running some trials this year to do some tests. We'll jump into this bag in a moment as well. And then we have our homemade potting mix blend that, surprise, surprise, is what we use pretty much exclusively. Let's start with Miracle-Gro. Label reading is something of a talent of mine, so allow me to read you the contents of this bag. This product is formulated from one or more of the following: processed forest products, peat, coir, and or compost, and sphagnum peat moss, perlite fertilizer, and a wetting agent. Now, the fertilizer in here, they go over a little bit further down. It's a 0.21% nitrogen, 0.11% phosphate, and a 0.16% potash. And the nitrogen, as they're required to show, is basically ammonium nitrate, the raw chemical form, but it's coated in a polymer that slowly dissolves and releases the nitrogen over time. Now, in my brazen opinion, this stuff is terrible. First off, the raw chemical forms of water-soluble nutrients are going to bypass the need to loop microorganisms into the party. The polymer coating that gradually dissolves doesn't just disappear, it dissolves into your potting mix, contaminating it with sketchy compounds that you don't want anywhere near your garden. And one of the most concerning things is the wetting agent that I mentioned earlier. They're not legally required to tell you anything about the wetting agent on the bag of mix itself, but if you go online, you can find out more information about what their wetting agent is actually made out of. I've talked about this before. I don't want to go too into it right here. You can read the linked articles, or you can watch our previous videos breaking down the contents of this particular mix more thoroughly. My not so radical conspiracy theory about Scott's Miracle-Gro is that the whole company is engineered to give gardeners short-term wins in the garden by giving their plants easy to scoop up nutrients while leaving the soil worse off with the biologically harmful compounds in their products. Then, when the next season rolls around, the garden isn't looking too hot, which makes the gardener ask why, to which Miracle-Gro answers, well, your plants just used up all of the nutrients in the soil that we sold you, but that's okay because we can help you out by selling you fertilizer that you'll need to use every single year to get your plants back to baseline. Honest businesses help you identify problems that you might already have and then sell you a solution. Scott's Miracle-Gro, and again, I don't care about coming down really hard on these guys. They create a problem and then they sell you the solution. Some people say start off with Miracle-Gro and then get into the organic hippie stuff later on. If that's what works for you, I am not judging you or criticizing you. My opinion is that shortcuts are rarely worth it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Espoma brand potting mix. Great branding on this bag. Organic potting mix enriched with mycotone for stronger roots. We'll touch on what that might be in a second. All natural potting mix with earthworm castings, mycotone, alfalfa meal, kelp meal, and feather meal. And all of this stuff and a few other things is exactly what's listed on the back under the ingredients section. This product contains 60 to 70% processed forest products, sphagnum, peat moss, perlite, humus, limestone to adjusted pH, earthworm castings, alfalfa meal, kelp meal, feather meal, and yucca extract. And then we get down into the active ingredients section, which presumably is where the trademark mycotone comes in. Ectomycorrhizal fungi, a total of 0.072 propagules ppg per cc. That's 2,038 propagules per cubic foot of the following species, which this is a 4 quarts bag, so about 1/10 of a cubic foot. What this means is that this potting mix has been seeded with mycorrhizal fungi spores that, when hydrated and placed in the vicinity of germinating seeds, will receive signals for help from the seeds so that they can help with its germination and growth. And at this point, I think that most organic potting mix brands are going to come loaded with mycorrhizae spores. And the reason for that is because they're great for plant health and they provide helpful collaborators for your plants. Now, the reason that this is labeled organic is not because it was not sprayed with pesticides and herbicides before being bagged. It's because it contains organic fertilizers in the form of alfalfa meal, kelp meal, feather meal, and yucca extract. The earthworm castings and the fungal spores are the biology that gets wakened up upon hydration in order to work on breaking down the organic fertilizers into bioavailable forms of food for the plant. If you're a longtime watcher of this channel, you know how vital a role biology plays in plant and soil health. The Miracle-Gro potting mix bypasses this process by supplying synthetic or inorganic fertilizers, so just raw nutrients that don't exactly need microbes to deliver them. Overall, I don't mind this product. It's not really worth it for me to buy pre-made potting mix like this. If I was gonna buy big bags of this stuff, the cheapest that I found on Amazon is 25 bucks for a cubic foot bag. And it's worth mentioning too that this is actually not being marketed as a seed starting mix. I bought this not realizing that there was a different one specifically for seed starting. This one is potting mix, like for a raised bed or large pot. The price is similar to seed starting mix. And for this stuff, the difference is that it's gonna be a little bit more chunky in its texture. So if you had this, you'd wanna give it a good sifting and it should just work fine. Or you can buy their seed starting mix. The rules of the road pretty much stay the same on how it works. Now, I'm gonna show you how you can replicate and actually improve each of these mixes by making your own. But to understand our ingredients, we need to understand what good seed starting mix is actually doing. The 3 main components to any seed starting medium are going to be drainage, moisture retention, and biology or nutrient. And so as far as the nutrients go, we already talked about how the Miracle-Gro mix does it. The espoma contains insoluble forms of nutrients that need to be processed by the microbes before exchanging them with the plant. And then for moisture retention, both of those options contain forest products, which just refers to decomposed wood-based material like bark, wood chips, sawdust, and waste products from the timber industry. It's sort of a flexible term, so the forest products in this bag might very well be differently sourced than the ones in this bag. It's hard to tell exactly. Both of these also contain peat moss, which, as you might be aware of, is a bog plant that's super fibrous, lightweight, and largely considered an unsustainable product. It accumulates very slowly, much slower than it's being removed, which removing it also releases carbon into the atmosphere, destroys the wetland habitats where it grows, and peat moss is waning in popularity for that very reason. But it's used for a reason, namely that along with the forest products, it holds on to moisture really well. Now, neither of these ingredients are going to contain anything notable in terms of nutrition for your plants, and they also won't contain any biology because they need to be pasteurized before selling these products so that there's no risk of weed seeds, pests, or diseases, hence the addition of fungal spores and worm castings. For drainage, each of these contain perlite, which is a volcanic glass particle, basically acts as a super lightweight, semi-hollow rock that allows water to pass through the medium. And then this is the thing when starting seeds, you want drainage, but not too much drainage. You want your mix to hold on to moisture, but not too completely. It's sort of a balancing act. So how do we make our own mix? Well, for us, we currently use a base recipe of compost, cocoa coir, and vermiculite. And you can download the recipe by hitting the link in the description or scanning the code on the screen. But to tell you a little bit here, the compost is going to contain the nutrients and the biology that our seeds need. Cocoa coir is our current slightly more sustainable alternative to peat moss, works great for holding on to moisture, as does our compost. And then the vermiculite is what we use instead of perlite because in our super dry environment, we actually are trying to hold on to moisture a little bit more than optimizing for drainage. And generally speaking, that's the deciding factor for which you might want to use. Vermiculite has a sort of puffy, fluffy component that helps create structure for your mix, but it's not actually a drainage ingredient like perlite. And I often hear these compared as though they're alternatives for each other. I thought that for a while, but really, while they are sort of alternatives within recipes, they don't really serve the same function. Just something to keep in mind. Now, this is the recipe that we've used in the past. It's one that we're using now. Works great. I can fully recommend it. Make sure that if you buy coco coir that you buy it from a trusted source, because it needs to be treated properly to work well. It needs to be washed of salts and other stuff. We use the Coco Bliss product from Plantonics. That said, we are looking for coco coir and vermiculite replacements. We'd love to be able to make 100% of our mix on site. And what we're experimenting with right now is leaf mold instead of coco coir and finely sifted biochar for vermiculite. So we'll keep you updated on how those go this year. We'll probably release a comparison in time for next growing season once we feel confident with it. But for now, compost, coco coir, vermiculite trifecta is a great recipe. And you can make this even if you don't have your own compost homemade. You can buy some pre-made and still save a bit of money in the process. Whatever you use, I highly recommend sifting your compost. I sift ours twice, once through a 1/2-inch hardware cloth strainer that I made out of 2x4s and hardware cloth, and then again through a 1/4-inch hardware cloth insert. This fits over a 27-gallon tote. I just pile the compost on, shake it back and forth, save the chunks for mulch or for the next compost pile. And then once I fill up one of these totes, I add the insert and I fill up another tote. Once I have that ready, I take it inside and I fill up these white bins. We've got these from IKEA. They're 16 gallons and it's been super nice this season. Cassidy does almost all of our seed starting right now. And this just allows her to come in, take a scoop of what she needs, and it's just all on hand for her to make batches as she goes. And this way I can check the bins and see if we're running low on any particular ingredient so that I can fill it back up. In the other bins, we've got coco coir and vermiculite. And this recipe is 2 parts compost, 2 parts coco coir, and 1 part vermiculite. And the reason that we're not making huge batches all at once right now is the stage in the growing season. While it's still winter, we're not doing too much seed starting. Cassidy does pretty much a single batch every day. Takes a little bit less than an hour, and making it in this container keeps it pretty manageable size-wise. She can keep it up on the table so she doesn't have to bend over or reach up over a big tote on the table. Now, if you're using homemade compost like we are and you haven't done anything weird to it, like microwaved it or contaminated it with something, it's gonna have all of the organic nutrients and biology that you need to get your seeds going. But to sort of reiterate what I said earlier, when it comes to seed starting, this is probably the time of the plant's life that we have the most amount of control over the environment and the conditions in which it's growing. So if we can make some extra investments at this point, it's always great to, if you're able. And I'll save the liquid ingredients that you can add when we get to the seed soaking portion because they're pretty much the same. But when it comes to dry ingredients you might want to add, if you happen to have them, there are several that I can recommend. First off, one that's already shown up in our bagged mixes is worm castings. These are great for a number of reasons. The bacteria in particular is wonderful in these, and they'll contain a bit of nutrition as well. The texture is pretty great, especially if you've sifted your own worm castings. Really doesn't hurt to add a few scoops to a big batch of potting mix if you've got them. Another ingredient that we like to add, one that we buy, is azomite. This is an all-purpose rock dust fertilizer, provides trace amounts of minerals. Great stuff. And I should say that something to keep in mind as you're sort of building your potting mix is that you're really building your garden soil as well. Any and all ingredients and components of a seed starting mix are eventually going to go into your garden soil, unless you're pricking your seedlings out and placing them in the ground. But for full transplants, you really want to think about this as a way to passively build and slowly improve soil health. And so the azomite is something that we add to our soil once in a while on its own, but it's also getting in there via our potting mix. Another ingredient, if you've got it, is bokashi bran. And bokashi bran is an inoculated wheat or rice bran. We've got several videos on how to make it. It's beyond the scope of this video to go over the whole process. If you've got it, this is a great source of biology that you can add to your potting mix. Just add a small amount and mix it up well, and it'll saturate your mix with biology. And then of course we've got our IMO4, which is an extra strong soil inoculant. We're running some experiments right now and have more in the works comparing how seedlings do when the IMO4 is added to the mix. We'll be showcasing IMO5 made out of potting mix probably next season, so you can get the full effects of it on our plant. But again, if you've got IMO4 from last season or you're able to collect and make it during the winter, now could be a great time to actually use some of it to give your seeds that initial boost of helpful biology. And I've been mentioning the benefits of having biology in your potting mix for a while now. So I want to touch on a few of the reasons why microbes are so important in facilitating healthy germination, sprouting, and initial plant growth. There are 3 phases within germination: water uptake, metabolic reactivation, and cellular expansion. So a dry seed absorbs water, swells up, and its coating softens. Then the membranes start hydrating, they regain permeability, mRNA proteins resume function, and the seed moves into the lag phase where its metabolism comes back online. Its mitochondria repair and multiply, its hydrolytic enzymes are activated, starch, proteins, and fats are mobilized into sugars and amino acids for the seed embryo, and the gibberellins rise and promote reserve mobilization and further cell expansion. Cells continue to expand and divide at the embryonic root, and the endosperm and testa start pushing through the seed coating wall. And once that happens, we've got germination. And that's just the very first part of a seedling coming into being from out of dormancy. During that whole process, the seed is sampling the environment through hormones and regulators. Basically, the whole switch from dormancy to germination is a move from conserve and protect to grow at all costs. And a major way that a seed seeks to do this is to pull in the collaborators, right? From the moment that a seed soaks up its first drink of water, the seed starts leaking exudates. It's sharing its stored energy in exchange for different needs that it can receive from the microorganisms that surround it. So bacteria and fungi populations start spiking immediately in the area right around the seed surface. There's a recruitment happening. Mycorrhizal fungi spores come out of dormancy only in response to those exudates. And the seed is actually carrying its own microbiome. There are microbes within the seed before germinating. There are microbes lying dormant on the seed coating. And all of these microbes are helping to facilitate the seed functions and also interacting with the microbes in its new environment. So we've got hormones coming online, acids breaking down seed coatings, energy stores being accessed, microorganisms being mobilized, and much more. That's why the biology in our seed starting mix matters. If we can create a safe environment in which our seeds can germinate, the chances of its survival and overall health are greatly increased. If that biology is present ongoing as the seed grows into maturity, the plant's immune system and overall strength and rigor are going to be starting out on a much better footing. This is why it's worth making these extra investments into the quality of your seed starting mix. Not to stretch this out too much, but they say that the first few years of a child's life are some of the most important and also, scary enough, the ones that the child has the least amount of control over. A community of healthy individuals who can nurture and socialize the child in those first few years are going to pay dividends to that person later in life. And bear with me on this analogy. The additional biology, the diverse and beneficial microbes that are present right at the plant's birth, are sort of like the first caregivers for the plants. And we get to decide if they get a lot of healthy caregivers. If you've only got a few microbes in the mix, the chances of some less helpful and maybe destructive influences coming in go up. Hopefully that made sense to you. If not, just ignore it. All that said, you don't have to make your own potting mix to get these benefits. You could buy a quality mix or even just a clean mix and then seed it with some of your own Bokashi brand or IMO4 if you've got it. But there is a point when it probably makes more sense to make your own. And so I wanted to calculate when that actually might be. So I added up the cost of the materials and ingredients that it ran me to get this set up. I'm not including the IKEA totes because they're not actually necessary for making your mix. They're more of just a convenience, but what we do need in order to make this is the vermiculite, the cocoa coir, and the compost. One day, maybe we'll be able to make all of our complete mix without buying anything from the outside world. But for now, that's what we've got. And also include the cost of the sifting totes and the hardware cloth sifters. And I'll include a link into my Amazon storefront for all of this stuff if you'd like to get anything yourself. I'll just say now, I don't recommend getting totes or hardware cloth or lumber from Amazon. It's just not worth it. You can get those much cheaper from your local hardware store. I used scrap lumber for my sifter. So that was free, but you can make one of these out of a 10-foot 2x4 for $7.28 at Home Depot. The totes cost $8.99 each, and the furring strip board for the insert you can get for $1.92. The smallest roll of half-inch hardware cloth runs $13.37, and the quarter-inch is $16.24. And assuming you have all the tools to cut wood and hammer a few nails, those tools being a saw and a hammer, that brings our equipment cost up to a touch over $67 after tax. $67 ain't nothing. But as long as you're taking care of your equipment, these should last you a while. I've used this stuff for 5 years now, and the totes are probably the things that crack the easiest. Then for the materials, I'm buying in bulk, so I have a pretty good savings. When they're not on sale, I can get 4 blocks of cocoa coir for $109.99. Big bag of vermiculite for $49.99, and my homemade compost is free. Once fully hydrated, a 10-pound block of Cocoa Bliss cocoa coir expands to roughly 2.5 cubic feet. So after buying a 4-pack of these, I've got 10 cubic feet worth of of core, meaning that I only need roughly 1/3 of a bag of vermiculite, but we'll add up the full total. And this brings the total ingredient cost to $174.37 after tax, assuming that you have your own compost, bringing the grand total to make a big old cubic yards worth of seed starting mix up to $241.41. Now, in order to accumulate a cubic yards worth of Espoma seed starting mix, it's going to cost you on the low end $1,233.88 if you buy it in 8-quart bags, which on Amazon go for $11.21 plus tax when you buy 5 at a time. Of course, the premium stuff is going to run you a bit, but even the Miracle Grow seed starting mix, which you can get for $9.59 plus tax for an 8-quart bag, is going to bring your total up to over $1,000. Now, past this point, it's going to be increasingly hard to do the math to decide which path is actually going to save you the most money, because it's possible, maybe even likely, that you don't need a whole cubic yards worth of seed starting mix. So at what point does it stop making sense to make your own? Well, if you're finding yourself buying 30 bags of Miracle Grow, which again, I do not endorse, or more than 20 bags of the Espoma, so long as you've got compost pile that's ready to be sifted, it really makes sense to make it your own. And honestly, if you factor in reusing your old sifting equipment each year and the actual amount of vermiculite that you're using, plus the amazing feeling that all DIYers get when they do, in fact, do it themselves, making your own is an undeniably superior path. And again, with potential to be even better, with more savings if you're making your own and using your own leaf mold instead of buying in coir or peat moss. All right, that was a long time spent on growing media. Let's talk containers, because once you actually get your seeds and soil ready, you're gonna need somewhere to put them. And there's so many options when it comes to growing containers, and many good ones. You can go with plug trays, cell block trays, flats, paper pots, plastic pots, ceramic pots, terracotta pots, biodegradable pots, eggshells, egg cartons, toilet paper rolls, old yogurt containers even. The options are pretty much endless. But as friends of the channel know, our longtime and preferred method of container is air. We swear by our soil blockers, and we've bought these once and expect to only stop using them when we need to buy bigger ones. Use whatever you want for containers. The only thing I can say specifically won't very likely work, at least from the small amount of personal experience that I've had and from what I've heard from everyone who's ever used them, are the biodegradable pots. I haven't really heard a success story with those. Those are like the little cardboard containers, or sometimes they're made out of peat moss or cocoa coir. They're meant to just act as an all-in-one, good-to-go sort of container that eliminates the need for plastic. But in reality, I think they just eliminate seeds. Maybe there's a way to use them that I don't know about. Otherwise, if you're gonna buy plastic plug trays or cell blocks, try to at least buy the best quality ones you can find so you don't have to keep buying them every few years, or get them secondhand or recycled. I really like our setup right now. We've got these cafeteria trays that are super sturdy, and then we've got our mini and our medium-sized soil blockers. Soil block seedlings do this thing called air pruning, where instead of the roots circling and tangling, they are more keen to just stop growing outward, and instead they beef up their root density, which is great for a number of reasons. Helps them with nutrient uptake, makes them a bit more drought tolerant post-transplant. And speaking of transplanting, soil blocks are super easy to transplant because you just pick them up. And sometimes the roots start growing into the neighboring blocks, but most of the time they just release and pick up easily. They make a great transition to just being planted into the great outdoors. Whatever you decide to use or have settled on already, there's really no best choice that defeats all the rest. A lot of it comes down to what you want to trade. So for soil blocks, we're getting reusability, what I consider some great benefits when it comes to sustainability and plant health. That said, it can be a little bit trickier to learn how to use a soil blocker and how the soil needs to feel in your hands for it to be able to hold its shape. Soil blocks also dry out a little bit faster than plug trays, especially the minis. So you have to keep an eye on them. You can't really skip more than a day or two of watering. That said, with the minis, we're fitting in hundreds of plants per tray, which saves us space. For cell trays, you're getting a little bit more convenience up front. You don't have to scoop out and scrape soil into the trays. You really just have to pile it in. Same for pots. Let me know in the comments what you prefer and what you've tried or what you want to try when it comes to containers. I'd be curious to hear if anyone has tried multiple options and has opinions about it. Once you have your container and your potting mix and your seeds, there's really just the step of planting. And again, I recommend consulting your seed packets for recommended depth of sowing. Some seeds like lettuce and soft herbs are gonna just need to be spread on the surface of your soil and then maybe mulched with a thin layer of vermiculite or very light sifting of compost or coir. You want to make sure that your seeds have good contact with the potting soil, and always water your soil prior to seeding, and only mist the top so that you don't wash the seeds away before they've rooted. Now, before planting your seeds, I mentioned before, there's an optional step that I want to turn you guys on to, and it's one that we've only really been using the past few years, but it's really great. It helps especially for seeds that might struggle to germinate, but overall, it's going to be beneficial for any seed that you plant, and it's this seed soak solution. Now, this particular one that we use isn't the only way to soak seeds. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing either. But essentially what a seed soak is doing is it's bringing specific compounds, enzymes, and microbes and nutrients alongside the seed in order to stimulate germination and get us closer to the result that we're hoping for, which again is a higher chance of germination and a higher chance that we've got a really strong, healthy plant. I've always noticed, and maybe you have as well, that the smallest and weakest plant starts that I transplant always end up struggling more than the other ones all throughout the entire growing season. So why not just take that out of the equation and grow all big healthy plants if possible? For the seed soak solution we're using here, we got lactic acid bacteria, fermented plant juice, vinegar, and oriental herbal nutrient. Now these are all Korean natural farming inputs that you can make at home, and you actually can't buy them from the store with the exception of vinegar. If you do buy vinegar for this, we've bought plenty in the past and it works great. Just make sure that you only get a high quality raw vinegar. White vinegar is pretty much stripped of beneficial minerals, doesn't contain any live cultures, so it's best to stick with something like apple cider vinegar. Here we're using a homemade apple cider vinegar, and then while we're on vinegar, I'll say that vinegar in the Korean natural farming sphere of inputs serves as a cleansing agent. We've used a very low amounts, heavily diluted as are all the other inputs, but the small amount of acetic acid from the vinegar is gonna help acidify the environment, making it inhospitable for microorganisms. The oriental herbal nutrient does something similar in that it provides an immune support for the seed, but along with providing different compounds than the vinegar is bringing in, it also has an alcohol base, and so it enters through the cell walls differently and more effectively. Again, we're adding teensy amounts. For the lactic acid bacteria, we've got our final immunity booster, and this one is providing lactic acid bacteria as a sort of counterbalance to the acetic acid bacteria from the vinegar. LAB provide immune defense, but they also help process nutrients and serve other functions in the seed germination process. And then finally, we've got our fermented plant juice, and it contains growth hormones, enzymes that are precisely geared toward helping seeds and seedlings stimulate healthy metabolic function and get growing fast, putting on vegetative plant mass. To make this, we dilute our fermented plant juice, LAB, and vinegar 1 to 500 in water, and the oriental herbal nutrient is diluted 1 to 1,000. For the stuff that we've got, it's over a year old, and since it becomes stronger with age, we actually dilute it 1 part OHN to 1,500 parts filtered water. And then for this solution, once it's mixed up properly, we use small dishes to hold the solution, and then we put our seeds that we're going to plant in there for a small amount of time. For small seeds, we go for 10 to 15 minute soak. Seems like hardly any time at all, but it's intentionally a very small amount. For medium-sized seeds, we typically let them soak for 30 to 60 minutes, and then larger seeds, we go up to a few hours. And you can use this solution for all kinds of seeds. You can use it for bare root plants as well. Good stuff all around, and in fact, we use it to hydrate our potting mix. So all of the beneficial inputs are getting to be a part of the seed starting process right at the beginning. If you've got these inputs, it's definitely something that you want to be doing. If you have yet to make any of these inputs, maybe this will be an encouragement to try them out. They're all super easy to make, with the exception maybe of OHN, but even that one is totally doable. You just have to commit to a little bit longer of a process, commit to buying a few more ingredients. That said, if you only have one of these ingredients, that's great, and you should try it out. If vinegar is all you have, try it out. Maybe you can make some lactic acid bacteria in anticipation of the seed starting season. Super easy to make, takes a week. You can check out our videos on how to make. We've got several. Fermented plant juice, if you're watching this in real time, might be hard to make from scratch since you're really looking to snatch up those first few vigorous plant shoots that start popping up out of the ground right at the beginning of spring. But you can definitely make it before you're ready to transplant your seedlings in the spring, which is great news because it's an excellent early season plant spray to have. All that said, whether you want to try out the seed soak solution or not, I hope you do give it a try. Whether you do or not, it's time to talk about what to do after the seeds are planted. And I mentioned 4 things that you need to manage: moisture, light, airflow, and temperature. And most of these things are set and forget sort of things, but the first one, moisture, is definitely a hands-on sort of thing. It is really important in these early stages of plant growth that you don't let your plants dehydrate. They can dehydrate fast. I'd say that if there was a time to baby your plants with water, it's probably now. If you've got good potting mix and all the other factors stay consistent, you shouldn't run the risk of a surprise desiccation event, but it can happen. Typically, we do a simple touch test after a visual inspection. If you look at the top of the soil, especially for soil blocks, if it looks dry or light brown, go ahead and give it a touch on top. If it doesn't moisten your fingertip at all, you want to water it pretty soon. You'll likely get into a bit of a rhythm as you get to know how fast your seedlings drink up the water that you give them. For watering, it really depends on what kind of container you're using. Soil blocks, we just water into the canals and the water runs through and the blocks can soak them up. This is sort of a bottom watering approach, which is ideal, especially before the seed has fully germinated. If a seed doesn't have a strong enough root system or any root system, it can be easily washed away with aggressive top watering. So if you need to water on the top, use a spray bottle or mister to water. You don't want standing water for a long time, but you also don't want to underwater. So it's one of those things that you will need to feel out. The main thing I'd say that's worth watching out for is actually a problem that you can solve earlier on. Make sure that before you plant your seeds, you transition your seed starting mix from being hydrophobic to hydrophilic. Almost any potting mix that you can get bagged and any potting mix that you make that is dry to the touch, which is what you want it to be so you can mix it up properly initially, but almost every potting mix is going to start out repelling water at first. Luckily, it can be very easily converted to a water retaining substance simply by giving it enough time to absorb the water that you're hydrating with. 30 minutes to soak up the moisture and hydrate goes a long way to removing its water repellent qualities. On the flip side, if you fill up a pot or a plug tray with bone dry potting mix and just water it once to hydrate the mix, you're running a big risk of the water just draining out of the way and not sticking around. Collect the water that runs out and run it back through the potting mix a few times. Better yet, hydrate your potting mix in a bin before packing it into your trays. For soil blocks, you have to get the medium hydrated anyway to be able to form a block that's going to hold its shape. Take your time hydrating initially, and then every time that you go to water after, the seed starting mix will be more apt to hold onto water. The next thing you got to manage is light. And this is one of those things that I'll just say, in our experience, you can get away with skimping on lighting, but it's not really worth it. You want to have ideally full coverage of your seedlings with a good source of light. Thankfully, lights are fairly inexpensive. Right now, we use these LED linkable shop lights. You can get a 4-pack on Amazon for 40 bucks. There are all sorts of fancy grow lights specifically made for growing plants, but for seed starting specifically, in my opinion, you don't really need the fanciest lighting. The exception might be if you're trying to grow plants indoors all the way to harvest, or if you've got a really big operation or something. For us, we're growing our seedlings until they're ready to go in the ground outside, and these lights get the job done at an affordable price point. We also invested in timers, and these again are fairly inexpensive purchase for what I consider a major convenience. It's really nice to be able to set and forget the lighting. With timers, the light manages itself. I will say that when we were first starting, I used to wonder if we could get away with just sort of positioning our plants near a window for natural sunlight, and I can say that just does not do the trick. Not enough light is going to come through in the winter while the sun is out, and not enough hours of light are being given to the plant to signal them to grow. Indoor seed starting is not a natural thing. If you're looking to go fully hands off and use the sun for your light source, do winter sowing. For indoor seed starting, you need lights. Again, get LEDs. Doesn't have to be super expensive. Just make sure you get enough for good coverage. We've hung single lights here on our racks in the middle, trying to get away with not having to buy more lights. The plants just start leaning inward toward the center just to try to get more light exposure. All right, airflow. This is one of those things that may or may not be relevant to you. We're growing in a larger space right now, so we haven't had much trouble with bad airflow, but in the past, we've been growing all of our plants in a bedroom or in a small entryway with a space heater. We needed a fan to keep things from getting too muggy. Fans just help circulate air through and help manage moisture. If excess water is an issue, again, we're not really having trouble with things being too damp here. If anything, it's a tad drier than we're used to. This is a new seed starting space for us. If you notice algae growing on your plants, it's not the end of the world, but too much that gets out of control can hamper growth. Damping off can also be an issue with too much moisture, so having a fan circulating air can help with that. But otherwise, this is a fairly hands-off problem to solve if it does need solving, that is. A few fans in your seed starting space is going to provide helpful airflow, and even a direct breeze on your plants can help prepare your seedlings for a windy environment outdoors once you transplant them. The last thing that you need to keep managed once your seeds are planted, and certainly right when you plant your seeds, is temperatures. This is critical to getting healthy seeds started. You need temperatures to be at the very least above 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius. Ideally, your soil temp is in the 65 to 80 degree Fahrenheit range. This is a wide range. It's pretty forgiving. There are some exceptions, and not to mention the rules change for perennials with cold stratification. But generally speaking, your indoor space needs to be in the 65 to 80 degree Fahrenheit range, 18 to 27 Celsius. If you're starting seeds in an indoor greenhouse, you can use a heating pad. We've used a space heater in the past when starting seeds in a poorly insulated part of the house. If you want to be sure, you can get a super inexpensive thermometer, hygrometer combo device that will keep track of your temps and humidity. Seeds won't get the good start that they need without consistent heat for indoor seed starting. Again, the rules change for winter sowing. Those seeds are getting a different treatment. For perennials, you're likely going to need to put them in the fridge or freezer for a length of time to get them cold stratified like I mentioned before. And then you can bring them out and start them with your other seeds. Once you've got your moisture, light, airflow, and temperature figured out for your seedlings, it's just time and patience, which if you've gardened at all before, you know is kind of what growing plants is all about. There are a few things that you need to look out for along the way as your plants progress from germination to transplanting. If you're using a biologically balanced soil, and especially if you're using these inputs, you really shouldn't need to worry about disease. However, sometimes it happens. And when it does start affecting your plants, you just want to make sure to remove the affected plants quickly so the disease doesn't spread. The main thing that you want to be looking out for, though, is if your plants are growing a bit faster than expected, but you're not quite ready to get them outdoors. If you see your plants growing tall and getting spindly, in soil blocks you can just see the roots hitting the outer edges of the soil blocks, you might need to transplant these into bigger containers so that the plant has more room for its root system. Other than that, there is one final step that your plants, especially your spring planting seedlings, are going to massively benefit from, and that is hardening off. You've babied your plants along for maybe several months at this point. Now it's time to introduce them to the real world. But when temperatures are still dropping down really low at nighttime, and especially if you've got strong wind, you want to get your plants adjusted gradually. And this process just looks like picking up your tray of seeds or seedlings or your pots themselves and bringing them outside, leaving them out for a few hours and then bringing them back inside. And you can sort of progress them toward giving them more and more outside time over the course of a week leading up to planting. So if your last frost date was on a Saturday, for instance, start bringing your plants outside for a few hours on Sunday before. If you're able to, gradually increase the number of hours that you keep them outside as the week goes on. This doesn't have to be a super systematic thing. It's more of an intuitive step that prepares your seedlings for survival. If you work a job away from home and temperatures aren't crazy, you can put your seedlings outside in the morning before you leave, come back home, bring them inside. And cold hardy plants like your brassicas, perennials, lettuces, and whatnot, this probably goes without saying, but those are gonna go out a bit earlier than your heat levers. For tomatoes, peppers, and especially cucumbers, plus many others, it's simply not worth it to rush them outside. You spent all this time growing them from seed. Don't trip over the finish line. Give your heat levers the heat. I'd say if you can wait until nighttime temps aren't dropping below 45, that's gonna be best in my experience, potentially even higher. And also, speaking from experience, if you know that you have a particular spring pest issue that you haven't quite figured out yet, be wary of planting baby seedlings outside too early before they're big enough to defend themselves. We had a rough time last year dealing with some serious munchers, but we were able to salvage things by waiting to plant out our seedlings until they got bigger. This is for extreme cases. We ended up potting up our soil blocks and bringing them outside to get the full sun exposure until they got big enough to outgrow their pots. And to start to conclude, honestly, it's really worth mentioning the insane potential of learning this skill of seed starting. It's such an unlock if you're growing or want to grow a lot of plants. Just practicing starting new seeds every year, seeing how new plants grow, learning how to save seeds from your heirloom varieties, it's what it's all about. Buying annuals can cost $4 or $5 a plant, which if you're only planting a few of each plant might make more sense for you. Buying perennials can cost considerably more than that, depending on the plant. Again, if you're only wanting a few, you might not need to buy a whole seed packet. That said, the cost savings aren't even something that I need to explain in detail. You can usually buy an entire packet of seeds for the cost of one seedling that you could buy from the nursery. And if you do want to buy plant starts that are ready to go, that's great too. Just try your best at all if possible, to find someone who actually grew them locally. If you pick them up from a grocery store, a big box hardware store like Home Depot or Lowe's, you might be buying a more mature plant that looks good when you get it and bring it home, but the chances of that plant surviving and actually doing well are much lower than if you got a plant from someone selling it who grew it in your area. So look on Facebook Marketplace. There's still a use for Facebook. People are often selling plants in my area in the spring and throughout summer. Look around your neighborhood for signs. There's someone not too far from us who sells tomatoes and peppers every year in their backyard. I think she calls herself the Tomato Lady. She draws a crowd with just a few signs and maybe a Facebook post. And speaking of selling plant starts, if you have some time and an entrepreneurial spirit, it's not an exaggeration to say that you could pretty easily cover the cost of your seeds and your seed starting setup in one season if you wanted to sell your excess plant starts. We did this last year in the spring and made back our money for the seeds that we bought, which was a lot. I think we spent $600 or $700 on seeds last year. Late spring and early summer, our garage sale season, put up some signs and have a weekend plant sale. Everyone who bought from us was so grateful to be able to get some healthy plant starts. And a lot of the people had tried to start some seeds before, but ended up killing their plants, or they bought some plants from the store and they forgot about them and now they wanted a second chance. So even if it's well into the summer and you've got healthy seedlings, give it a try. Seed starting is an incredible way to fill out your garden. It's a no-brainer if you're buying more than a dozen of any given plant type, but even if not, you don't have to start off huge all at once. Try getting a few grow lights this year and a plug tray or some old pots. People oftentimes give these away. And then try growing your favorite annual and just see how it feels. This is possible. If you've got some experience but struggle with disease or ailments, try out the seed soak solution. If you've only ever bought a seed starting mix from the store, try making your own this year. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. I hope this was a helpful guide as you walk into seed starting this year, and I look forward to hearing about your gardens. Let me know if there was anything in this video that I didn't get to covering that you wish I would touch on. If you found this video helpful and you're looking to get started with Korean natural farming this year, but you don't know quite where to start, you'll want to check out this video next. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.